Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shoe and Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, the footwear industry and many industries are in whirlwind right now for a number of reasons. It's not just the T word, the tariff word. Our supply chains have been on fire for a couple of years now. There's been a lot of issues and challenges that our industry's faced. And one thing that we constantly talk to our members about is innovating through that. The only way through the fire is to innovate your way through it in many ways. And I think, in particular, where we're at is just trying to look at things a little bit differently, find new materials, find new suppliers, constantly change and innovate as we continue to try to deliver great value to consumers. One of the areas, though, I think in particular that our industry can do a lot better on is looking at kind of new innovators that are coming up that may not have the scale our traditional suppliers that we work with have, but there's challenges to that because I think our industry in particular may not have, kind of the right insights or kind of understanding some of those innovators that are producing next gen materials, next gen processes, et cetera. And so this show in particular, I think is going to be very fascinating because it will help us kind of unpackage that and think a little bit more critically in that space. So with that, I want to thank Alan Lugo for coming on today. He is a dear friend I've known for a long time, worked at Wolverine for many years. He's had stints at Natural Fiber Welding and now is going out to help brands specifically in this place kind of look at innovations and opportunities to try to unite or link up, I guess, kind of next gen with where we are as an industry to kind of launch it forward. And he's also brought on Stephanie Downs, who is the founder of Uncaged Innovations, which sounds awesome. So I'm interested in uncaging some of the innovations for our listeners today, Stephanie. Awesome. As we get into it really quickly, Stephanie, what's your give us your background and then a little bit about Uncaged Innovations.
Sure. Perfect. Hi. Nice to be here, Andy. So my background is all in entrepreneurship. Fortunately, I have a fabulous CTO co-founder in the venture. I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. This is my third venture. My first was a digital marketing company, which is not interesting today, but in 1999, my biggest competitor was the Yellow Pages. And then I had that company for 14 years and sold it, then went on to start a plant-based meat company in India, actually. So big turn. And then after selling that company or selling out there, decided to turn my attention to materials. And the reason that I wanted to do that is I'm vegan. I've been watching the space for many years as far as different innovations that were being developed, lab grown, myceliums and things, and just felt that there was still a lot, there was a growing demand for these innovations, but there was a lot of challenges in the space as far as scaling, performance, price, and wanted to throw my hat in the ring and see if we could come up with an innovation. So connected with a brilliant scientist, and we've developed a material that I'm happy to show, which is made of grain proteins. So we use different types of components from wheat, soy, corn to make the backbone. We've used in other things such as flower extracts to give it fragrance, mineral pigments for coloring. So completely bio-based, and we're working a lot of big brands out there.
That's fascinating. So you started disrupting the Yellow Pages, and now you're coming into footwear. Nice.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny to think back because people used to, at 1999, I'd have companies who would say to me, well, we'll try this, but just so you know, we will never stop using the Yellow Pages. It's never going to be replaced by this thing called the internet, or
oh my God.
And now we'll be in meetings with brands who will say, well, we want to do this, but just so you know, we'll always use leather. And it just really takes me back to 25 years ago.
Alan, as you hear her talk about her experience and then what she's doing now with materials from your background, what are things that stand out for her journey, and then how, in particular, this material she's talking about, how that kind of folds into our industry, how we understand these new materials and how we apply those materials.
Yeah, Andy. I mean, thanks for allowing us to be on. And right now is a very interesting time in this industry and many industries. But I think what I find most interesting about the material space is one layer, right, of what Stephanie said. I'm most people who know me know I'm not a vegan, but I am also very critical of the leather industry. I want to see that get better. I want to see much more improvements on the animal side there, regenerative agriculture, things like that. And then at the same time, we know this issue of the alternative to leather up until now had just been basically toxic plastic stuff, right? So that's why I'm very interested there. But Stephanie is one of the startup founders that I've been engaging with recently. And what I think is so interesting about her background is like she's done it before, right? When you talk to most startup founders, it's usually somebody doing something for the first time. And it's maybe like their first or only passion or something like that, right? So I think Stephanie was really interesting because she's done it before a couple times, and now she's coming into this sort of fashion footwear industry with a material that, like she said, like people kind of have assumptions and there's the status quo. But also within the industry, people want to make those changes. The brands want to do some of the right things, but everything has to come together, right? And that's what I'm enjoying with my business right now, is living in this sort of soup of investors, supply chain, brand, startups, and I don't know, there might be another one, but really it's like connecting dots there. And sometimes there's a gap, and I'm trying to sort of like be the glue in this space to some extent with.
Yeah. So what's the gap? What are we getting wrong? What are shoe companies getting wrong when they talk to innovators or talk to startups? Like what's the missing value proposition that brands just aren't connecting with?
That's a deep question. We could basically fill the next 20 minutes just answering that question. But I mean, I think that's a little bit of what we came to talk about today. I think one of the things I would say is sort of like understanding, high level what it's like working with a startup. I'll say a few things, then Stephanie can definitely fill in as well. So I think for the most part, and this is a world that I lived in for very long, and I had to sort of unlearn what I had learned, right? What I tried to be so good at. Now I have to start to unlearn some of that. Is like usually the relationships with footwear brands and people who have materials, I'll call it, because sometimes it's a supplier, sometimes it's something else, is the person with the material is just trying to get business. They're just trying to earn, but they're just trying to sell something to that brand badly. And the brand is sort of trying to solve some sort of a problem, product problem, consumer problem, whatever. The thing that's really interesting about with these material startups is it almost changes the paradigm, where these material startups, for the most part, sometimes are kind of solving a problem that is, and I don't want to offend anybody in this realm, but that's more meaningful and impactful than the one the brand is solving, right? And the brand has a little bit of vested interest in that, but they're not quite sure, like we aren't quite sure yet how much of an interest they actually do have in solving, using animal products or solving a carbon issue or solving a toxicity issue. And so I think the fundamental understanding of that's a different type of relationship. And that startup is trying to get some business, but it's kind of a different calculus of how much they're trying to solve a problem, how much they're trying to learn. They might be trying to raise investment dollars. They're doing a lot of different things. And then I think most of the brand teams are used to just engaging with somebody who's selling them a product. And so it becomes like a price performance, delivery time, and all those things matter. Right. But so I'll leave it there to say, you have to look at it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And Stephanie, how do you
go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I think Alan makes an interesting point. The conversations are going to be a little bit different when you walk in the room and talk to them about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So from your perspective, when you're trying to deliver value to brands, what are the conversations like? What are you looking for? How do you find the right partner? Who's your ideal champion that you're really trying to connect with,
Yeah, no, it's been, interesting. We've been engaging with brands now for a couple of years, even when we were just at, lab scale with small pieces. And we learned some funny things that, when we would try and explain to people what R&D was, that just went, to them, R&D was just changing a color and a texture, not. And so we'd send them something and say, this is just a work in progress. And then some people would just ghost us because they're it was so early on, but you have to start somewhere to get that feedback. So, we've learned that, there's a lot of challenges. I would say if I had to compare or if I had to create an analogy on what it feels like to be a startup, I always say to people, it's like we're in a little tiny dinghy and the companies are a container ship and we're trying to share the same channel together. And, there's so many ways that we can get crushed and flipped over. And so, I think that for us, the best partners are the ones who do understand the R&D aspect and this journey that we have to go on, because they're so used to having their tanneries, or their mills come in and say, here's the colors for this season, here's this thing they're already, or they can also ask them, hey, can you try 100 different colors for us? And the tannery does it for free. And you know what I mean? There's a lot of different things that we plug in a different way, which is one of the reasons I've been encouraging Alan, like start a consultancy to, help bridge this gap, to explain to them like what it's like to be a startup, and then explain to us like, okay, they have different seasons that they're dealing with. So I think one that really understands R&D is really helpful. And then also is kind of willing to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, whether it's paying higher at the beginning. A lot of companies, it's interesting, I've learned there's a difference in scaling. So the term scale means different things to different people, because obviously they want to put money into companies that are already at, like, there's two different types of scale. There's proving you can scale it, right? Like just getting it to where it's producing enrolled rolls, versus right now, for example, we're producing in 200 meter rolls, but we can produce 2000 meter rolls. It's not a problem. It's just we're producing multiple colors, smaller rolls. Once we get to where we're producing 20,000 meters, all those dollar amounts go down. But brands want to pay what the price is going to be when we're doing 20,000 meter roll, through 20,000 meter runs. So yeah, so just some of those different things of going on the journey with us makes a big difference.
How are the conversations when it comes to where consumers are heading versus where the brands are only edging slowly towards that, right? We know consumers are more concerned about the environment. I mean, right now we see fires, floods, it's impacting people in ways we never thought possible, right? So obviously, around kind of Earth Day, when we're kind of talking about that today, when consumers are shifting and brands are not shifting and there's a disconnect, like obviously in the past, when we're talking about sustainable materials, it'd be a small segment. It seems like the segment's growing. It seems like the consumer base is like growing, and there could be more opportunities for companies like yours to go in and more easily talk to those folks about this.
Yeah, it's definitely growing, and especially with the younger generations, the up and coming, really what's going to be the primary future consumers. So, with the brand, it's interesting. Like I would segment the brands into two categories: the ones that don't quite, they're putting their toe in the water, but they don't fully get it yet. And then the ones that understand that they're going to be Kodak if they don't do something about this, and they, and so that it's coming, that these things take time. It takes time to integrate these. So they either lean in hard or they're way back. We don't get too much in between, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Alan, from your perspective, what's the obligation for the footwear industry when it comes to startups? Like, what is it? I opened up the whole show talking about how many challenges and problems we're having, right? So if we keep operating in the same way transactionally, we're going to keep getting the same results, my opinion. But I would like to hear what you have to say in terms of where the industry needs to dig a little deeper in this space, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that word obligation is an important and interesting one. And I've been having discussions, and sometimes I'm active on LinkedIn, and to think about, like, I always like to separate this idea of brand and individual, right? Because we always like to see a brand as if they have a personality, but it's just a collection of individuals. So, I think brands themselves do have some sort of obligation to the industry and to move the industry, right? Because the industry is made up of brands. So, but I think it's kind of a question too. Sometimes whether you're at the executive level of the brand or you're one of the ones working in the innovation of the sustainability team, sort of just think about it, is our work sort of an obligation for the industry? Is it an obligation for the brand? Is it something that the product needs and we're trying to find it? But also sometimes too, to think about or is this like charity, right? And sometimes charity's okay. Like if you're a startup, you'll take some charity dollars, right? You'll ring the bell out in front of the door and you'll take little bits of this and that. But somebody somewhere along the way has to do something to move things forward. And I think that's the interesting roles about what brands play. You can talk about marketing and brand archetypes, but Stephanie might know, and I might know from working with lots of brands of some of them do sort of have a sort of culture of innovation and doing different things and pushing things forward. Yeah. Some of them have a culture of marketing amazing product. Some of them have really strong core values, so that you automatically know hey, what we're kind of doing might go against their values. So that might not be a good match. So, but I think everybody, every brand, every team should always work on that strategy. which is difficult, right? Strategy is an easy word, but hard thing to really understand of what is the thing that we should be doing, and kind of start there. I mean, because I think there's a lot of stuff that you can just chase, keeping your innovation team busy by saying, hey, go out and find out what these 30 companies are doing. But what things actually make sense with what the brand is looking to do, or what the people might expect from them. Might someone expect this of you over that? Stephanie talked about vegan. There's some brands that they might expect them to have something there or do something there. And then there's some brands that like most of their consumers probably don't, right? And so what's driving it? Maybe it isn't the veganism, but there's a lot of benefits, environmental benefits that come along with veganism that support many other causes, carbon reduction, renewable resources, all these kinds of things. So,
Stephanie, what is your opinion on that too? I want to bring you into that.
So a couple of points I'll work off of there. So first of all, it is interesting. We do want to see the brands lean in more. And I think what also a lot of brands don't realize is that there's different ways of leaning in that aren't always financial, things like letters of support that we can use to apply for grants. Like we had a situation where we were applying for a $1 million grant, and it was one we had a very likelihood chance of getting. And then we didn't get the grant, and we had to ask multiple companies to provide a letter of support saying this is a type of material they're very interested in, that they'd be interested in buying if it met their specs, that type of stuff. And we didn't get the grant. And the feedback was because we didn't get anybody to agree to do a letter. This was in our early days before we really had brand partnerships. And the feedback in the grant was that they didn't see the demand from the industry because we didn't get letter. So that kind of stuff, it would have been just such a simple thing for a brand to do. And so then also things like letter of intents that we can show to investors, offtake agreements, even prepaying small amounts of orders that we can then use that money toward R&D, offering to talk to investors. There's so many different things that they can do because we can get the money in other places if they can't give it, but the investors have to see a path forward. That's just incredibly critical, that they have to see the demand's going to be there. And then the final thing I will say for the brands that are listing is I will say I have some sympathy for them from the standpoint that I do think, especially in the footwear space, some brands have leaned in and they've put in some some substantial financial support and got burned, to innovations that didn't come to market, didn't scale, ended up being too pricey or weren't durable. So I understand brands may be stepping back a little bit, but I would encourage them to I truly believe that right now our industry is in a phase of what's second mover advance, second mover wave, right? And when you look back at all technology, we had BlackBerry before we had the iPhones, before that we had pagers, right? Before we had Google, we had Buy Jeeves or Ask Jeeves or whatever it was. So, that just often happens that the second move is better. And right now the innovations that are coming out, like us, for example, we're already fully scaled in roles and the performance is great. So take a look at don't just, if you've been burned before, you have concerns because you've seen others, things are changing substantially in this space.
I think innovation is falling forward, right? This idea that if you make a mistake, you pull back. That's where you make bigger mistakes, right? It is sometimes you fall forward and you have to pick yourself up and keep going. And I think the successful companies do that strategically, right? A friend of mine, Scott Labby, who is now at Keen, who worked at Wolverine for many years, was talking about failing fast and cheap, right?
Yeah.
That's the mentality that a successful company can think about, of saying okay, to your point, well, you're not at the scale we have yet, but we want to get you there because we believe in what you're doing. So we'll sign letters for grants, letters of intent, maybe we'll do some sampling with you here and there and help with that. So there's obvious ways to work without, kind of being squeamish around being well, I'm not sure we'll buy. It's okay, you don't need to buy all the roles. We're just asking you to sit down with us, have a conversation,
right? See
where we fit in. And then let's talk about strategy about how we support your business and how you support our business. And I think, that's, I guess, the whole episode today is kind of leaning into that for brands to think a little bit more strategically about startups, that you need to have more conversations with startups, not less. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Alan, am I wrong?
Yeah. I think it everything's about resources, right? And so you're right and wrong at the same time, right? There's both sides of the coin.
That's what
part of it is you don't want to just have meetings for the sake of collecting information, not doing anything. But I think it is about sort of getting out there and understanding like who is doing something that aligns with what we're looking for. So it kind of goes back to knowing what you're looking for. I mean, one of the things that I feel like is, my experience in this is relatively recent. So I think it's also relevant, but I think it's really good if you're working with, whether it's, some brands are bigger. So they have a materials team and an innovation team and a sustainability team and their inline product development team. And those are kind of like all shared duties at the smaller brands. But it's kind of nice if you were a startup and you went in and the team or the company, whoever just kind of comes to you and says, look, this is how we engage startups. I think that's like a huge step that any brand can make. And like, you could talk to Stephanie, you could reach out to me, or you could just try to start off of watching this episode of saying like, this is how our system works. And I think, we're talking about a great thing like currency. Just to have ideas, like just to have an understanding, this helps the teams at the startup so much to go up to front and say, we will use our shipping account. We will test things in our lab, because I can't tell you how many times that there's like anxiety when you just get to the end of a call and you're thinking about, are they willing to pay for the shipping of these samples?
Tons, yeah.
Like that's a big budget resource that if you're at one of the medium or large size brands, you never even spend any thought thinking about the shipping account and who pays that bill. But on the startup side, like that can be a significant amount of money when you're trying to work with 20 brands, So from that to testing, come in and say, this is what we do. We have an introductory call. We then ask for samples, which we will pay for, on your behalf. Yeah. We will then test them internally. And then, knowing like, hey, we will then provide the feedback. Some people don't. Some people want to keep those results. That's understandable. But again, that's another currency. If you run the test and if you give the results back to the startup, that's of great value because then they can know, how does this align with our internal testing we've done? How does it align with other brands we've done? A lot of startups are depending on where they're at, right? We don't want to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of them, there's a consistency issue that they're either trying to solve with new equipment or with new processes, or they're just trying to figure out like, hey, is our testing equipment calibrated the same way that these brands are? Are we doing the same tests? So just getting 5 or 6 test reports from different brands is very useful, right? And so I think it's a little bit harder for a startup to come in and say, this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what we're trying to dictate sort of. They want to be a good partner to the brands. So I think it's helpful if the brands can come in and say like, this is how we work with startups. This is what we expect. Yeah. The first month, we're probably going to do these things. And then we'll do these things. We will make a prototype or, because Stephanie probably knows some brands you can get tied up just in the testing rigmarole. And you might just be thinking, can we just get a shoe made to see how it looks? And it's good just to let somebody know up front, like, look, we're not going to make any shoes for 6 months because this is the process. So to me, that's important.
Like kind of on the brand side there, you need to be thoughtful about your guidelines and your upfront honesty with startups as they come in. So they have aligned expectations. But I'd also say if you create those guidelines and a framework, you also probably know, sooner rather than later, like which startups are going to be a fit for your brand and what you're looking for, right? Like because that forces you to say, what are we solving for? Where are gaps? How do we engage with these? So it helps kind of build an innovation kind of runway for a company. And it's interesting you're saying that because as I'm sitting here thinking about it, like, most companies don't have that. They don't even think about creating kind of an innovation guideline to how they want to operate with partners and even adding in those things you talk about. Like, if we engage with a startup, we want to support them by sampling. We want to support them by paying the shipping costs. We will support, list those things out like up front so that you can commit to those like that. Because sometimes it's going back to, leadership and saying, this is what we should commit to do in these spaces to be an innovation leaders and like thrust the brand forward. These are small things that will support this startup. But again, from my knowledge, for a lot of companies, they don't have any of this set up. It's just like these engagements that it like having that set up, Stephanie, would obviously provide fruitful discussion.
Would be awesome. Yeah.
And you're automatically talking about value in the conversation instead of like, going back and forth.
Exactly. No, then we know the go, no go, if you've got to this point or whatever. So that clear communication. I would say, Alan, if I had to estimate, not even 5% of brands can do that right now. Most of them, they're out there looking. And so I'll throw out a couple other thoughts. One, I think, one of the things we've seen the best of the brands that have done what Alan's talked about as far as have a roadmap. The other thing that we've seen them done that is very unique and it seems to be extremely effective is that the people involved are financially incented off of innovations getting adopted. So not just finding innovations, like 95% of the brands out there, their innovation and sustainability team's only responsibility is, from what we understand at least, is to go out and find innovations and present them to the designers. And that's where it ends, right? Whereas when the ones where those people are actually, they're almost like salespeople, right? Like they got to go out, they got to find the innovations, they got to take them to the designers, the different, if you're in a house, take it to the different brands and sell it through, meet with those people. And they're out there like aggressively pushing that through because they want the bonus they're going to get off of getting an innovation adopted. And that just seems to work really beautifully. And that's just a very different way of structuring like your innovation team. And then also that I think we're, again, because I do try to look at both sides of the table and understand where the brands are at. One of the challenges I think they've faced is that there's a lot of innovators in our space that have put out great press releases and have great websites. but when the brand does calls with them, they sign NDAs and then the people send the material and it's like, it falls apart, like that kind of stuff. And somebody like an Alan in that type of a resource can also help brands, I think, waste less time because I do think they have to waste a lot of time looking at all the innovators and trying to figure out which ones are really scaled, which ones can meet the performance, which can, and so I think that, there's challenges on both sides, but I love that we're having this conversation, even to begin to talk about how do we work together smarter because these things are not getting adopted fast enough and that's going to kill off the innovations.
Alanandres, right? Is that the
alanandres? That's my company, my LLC.
It just rolls off the tongue. You
got to get used to rolling it off the tongue. There's a lot of A's in that word.
Alan, how do brands contact you to learn more about what you're doing and how you can support them?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't have like a formal website, but I do. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. Some people know me for that. They know me for I call it drawing lines in the sand. Where if you read my comments and my post, you're going to know if I have a mindset that aligns with what you're trying to do or not pretty quickly, I think. But yeah, email Lugo ALUGO at alanandres.com. But yeah, LinkedIn or if you're in the footwear industry, you're probably only 1 degree of separation of somebody who I know. So, but yeah, definitely reaching out, and then obviously you'll see me at FDRA sustainability events sometimes and things like that. So I try to be active and around, but travel budget gets tight sometimes, right?
And Stephanie, for Uncaged Innovations, how can folks contact you to learn more? I mean, both in terms of the materials, but also if they want to further this conversation, let's say a company is like, actually really interested in developing guidelines that help us better engage with startups.
Perfect. Yeah, we'd be happy to engage in that. So uncagedinnovations.com, so innovationsplural.com is our website. We're also active on Instagram and LinkedIn. And then if they want to reach out to me personally, it's Stephanie, my full first name, at uncagedinnovations.com.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on because I think this is a space where we haven't had a conversation like this in the past around like engaging startups, right? We talk to startups about what they're doing and what they can produce, but this is really fascinating in terms of like how brands think about structuring engagement much more fluid. Because at this point in time, to Alan's point, like I'm half right and half wrong, so that's nice. We can pull that clip out, Christy, and run that. Alan will run that like nonstop on LinkedIn. But I think it is like where we're at a crossroads of an industry on product, but it's also in terms of our operations, right? We need to operate much more efficiently, fluidly, engage more honestly, find new solutions and innovations. And the only way to do that, I think, is to kind of create more of a framework about how we operate internally. And this is a space where footwear companies haven't done a great job broadly. Like I can name off several we all know that have a system in place and they're, and it shows up in the market and they know how to do that. But for the most part, even if you're a wholesaler, developing like specific guidelines and being thoughtful about that, I'll even say this, like assigning an innovation title to someone, at a company that is the point to engage with for these things, right? Like most people don't have that either. And I'm not trying to add more work on people's plates or give titles away, but it does create structure to help your company find innovation, and it provides structure to those innovators on how they want to engage so you can find that exact right fit. Now, Alan, do I have that half right or whole right? You tell me.
Yeah, no, it's just tough to say. I mean, I think the innovation thing is so tricky, right? Because the moment you try to structure it and put labels on it and say, this is how you do it, it's very easy to then say, well, that's going to hamper the innovation. But everybody's got to find the way, and you want to try to not waste time, right? And so it's like innovation should be like a flowing river, right? It's not a swimming pool. Like it's got to keep moving. It can't sit around and think too much if that's what you're really trying to do.
So it's more like creating a guide instead of a standard, right? Standard is like a rigid way to work, but a guide is like a framework for where you can
know what to do, know when to react, know this. You can like keep moving forward or jump off, right? You know?
So Stephanie, I think the answer was Alan basically said I was right. That's what I'm going to might as well know.
And I think you're also right. The only thing I would add is I think a lot of this has to come from the top, or at least somewhere near the top. Because if it's coming from lower levels, it has a much harder time. But if it's an initiative, set in stone from the top that they want this to happen, we see it move much faster.
It is interesting because some of the best innovative companies have a person who has the title and they report to the CEO, right? Yeah. So it just depends on how you want to structure your company, but like having directness to the CFO or CEO to make real-time decisions on investments. And obviously you need a person that you trust to do that and that understands your business and all that. But again, it's creating those opportunities and spaces and structures in the company to move much quicker than we've been moving in particular. So, all right, we could keep going on this, but
we'll have multiple episodes.
It's a good start. It's a good start to the conversation. And again, we haven't had this before. So Alan, I want to thank you for helping set this up. And Stephanie, thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here.
And I know you got some great people on your board that's working with you.
Work in footwear, or work.
And I think that's the other big thing too, from a startup side, is having that kind of buy-in from industry professionals feeding their expertise in. And so it creates a difference, I think, for startups when we are like, oh, I know that person. Okay, like that makes a lot more sense. Okay, like let's definitely engage. So good. So we look forward to following your journey. And Alan, I'm sure I'll see you soon, either on a Zoom call or
I'm always around.
So folks, again, this is Shoe and Show. Thank you for listening. We cover the ins and outs of all things footwear, from design, supply chain, materials, all the way to the cash register. And we appreciate you listening. Shoeandshow.com has our full catalog of all the episodes. And we appreciate you listening. And until next time, on Monday when a new episode drops, Shoein is out.
Shoein has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.